Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today. This is the first of our research and grant writing presentations of the year. And so we are very lucky to have Dr. Melanie Page here to speak with us. Dr. Page is the Associate Vice President for Creative and Scholarly Activities at WVU. She has her bachelor's, master's, and PhD from Arizona State University in psychology, family resource and human development, and quantitative psychology. She came to WVU from Oklahoma State, where she was a professor of psychology. Her research interests are in the area of health-related behaviors and programs, as well as teaching, mentoring, and scientific workforce development. She does have background as a PI and co-I with funding from NSF and NIH. And her primary responsibilities at WVU include helping faculty in the arts, humanities, and social sciences attain external funding and recognition for scholarship, as well as the development and implementation of internal programs to enhance competitiveness of faculty for external grants. Dr. Page is going to be talking to us with a presentation entitled "The Role of the Research Office in Your Career Success." So, thank you, Dr. Page.
Thank you, Jim. I'm gonna take you around with me everywhere. It sounds really smart. Thank you for having me. So I will talk in just a minute, but it will help me if we go around the table and if people can introduce themselves as to obviously your name, but what area in CPAS are you in and what are your research interests. And I'm gonna try to jot down little notes because one of the things that Peter knows that I do is I try to pay attention to who does what, and then if I hear of either a funding opportunity and or somebody else doing the same thing, I try to help people do collaborations and get funding, that kind of thing. So the more that I know about what people do, the easier my job is.
So of course you're starting with me.
But I'll say we'll mess ourselves up and we'll go right.
I'm not faculty. I'm a first-year doctoral student. I'm just stopping in to see if there's something worth learning. That's Dr. Watt's on the way in.
Okay.
See if there's something
Well,
worth learning.
welcome.
Thanks.
Dana Volker, we've met many times. But I'm in sports psychology and I study body image eating disorders in athletes.
I'm Amy Tsuda. I'm in physical education, teacher education program, and my research focus is health disability among young children and how to train teacher better to teach those children.
I'm Ed Edsel, and I'm a professor here. My interests are in ethics and professional issues in sport and exercise psychology, as well as mental health and athletes.
Hi, I'm James Wine, Assistant Professor of Physical Education, Teacher Education, and my primary research interest centers on instructional technology.
I'm Guy Hornsby. I'm in coaching, research interests primarily athlete monitoring and transition in research.
Pete Jacoby, and I just want to say you have the coolest job title I've heard of anyone else.
No one knows what I do, so that's either a good thing or a bad thing, right? Like people will be like, wow, that's a really cool job title, you must do something.
Job title?
I did not.
No.
It actually has an interesting history.
It can be whatever you want it to be.
I'm Ashley. I'm an adjunct in sport and exercise psych, and I research sport deviance.
I'm Michelle Sandry, and we had talked on the phone in the spring semester. I think Marion Chambers had a question when I was applying for the MBA GE grant, so we communicated. But anyway, I joined West Virginia Clinical Translation Institute because of that.
Okay.
That was before biostatistical help. But I'm in athletic training, and my research interest is tissue biomechanics.
Well, thank you. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then about my job and the research office, and then a cool resource I found in preparing for this talk that I didn't know we actually had. So as Jack said, I was a professor at Oklahoma State for 16 years. I was in psychology, but I'm a statistician by trade. And so I was involved with a lot of different projects. ranging from pediatric cancer to childhood obesity. And then particularly with the workforce development is around women within STEM and then in the academy. And so I've done a lot of things as a statistician and got to know a lot of areas. And I think that's actually what helps me adapt pretty quickly to this job, is having worked across a variety of fields in my regular job, including engineering education, landscape architects, you know, obviously everybody in psychology, people in education, and so I have a diverse set of experiences, have been a co-PI, a PI, a giveaway your work for free eye. And so I have a variety of experiences that I hope that I'm able to draw on to help faculty be successful. I really had no intention of leaving Oklahoma State. So Oklahoma State has a pension system. So you know the day you walk in when you can walk out. So it's number of years of service plus 30. I plan to retire at 60. Or number of years of service plus 30 had to equal 90. And so I very clearly knew walking in when I was walking out. A friend had sent me this job and I thought, wow, that's like the coolest job in the world. But I have no intention of leaving Oklahoma State. I had 2 young kids. And so just put it in the delete file. And then about 6 months later, kind of realized that if I stayed at Oklahoma State, I could not pursue one of the passions of mine, which is actually administration. That it was really a system that was designed for yes people. And if anybody knows me, I'm not the best yes person. And so I pulled the job ad out of the trash. The job had already closed. I applied a month late and thought, what the heck? And sent my application in. And then at every step of the way, I thought, didn't hear anything for a long time. So I thought, okay, well, great, I'm not getting that job, that's okay. And then each step actually kept moving forward. So after my interview, Fred had actually called the Friday before Labor Day weekend, or Memorial Day weekend. I'm like, who does that to somebody? It's like, and if anybody knows Fred is not a really excitable person. And so all weekend I was working on my conciliation speech of, you know, thank you for the opportunity, so nice to meet everybody. But it turns out they were offering me the job and had to come back for a second interview. So I really had nothing to say. I was speechless when Fred called on Tuesday because I had been practicing my great thanks for the opportunity speech. And I didn't really have the, are you actually interested in the job speech? But I did a second visit. I ran a summer science camp for high school students, so I had to wait until after that, so I didn't get to visit until the end of June. And then as you may know, the wheels of bureaucracy used to turn really slowly here. And we didn't have a finalized offer until mid-July, and they wanted me here in the fall. So I actually uprooted and moved the household at the beginning of into the semester. So if you're ever to change jobs, don't do that. Do not move your children in October. They liked it a lot because it took us 2 weeks to get them into a school system. Thankfully, our rental had this great swing set in the back, and they were still swing set age, so it ended up working out fine. The position was newly created, so they had tried the position before, I guess like 20 years ago, as a part-time. Somebody could do this 25% of the time, and I'm sure you all have either done and or know people who have done these 25% or 50% assignments on top of your faculty job, and they never work out. And so it was not successful. And so they had one associate vice president for research in the research office, and historically that person had been in the natural sciences or engineering, and that was where the concentration was. So people felt most of the resources were going to those fields as well as most of the attention. And so when they, under the previous president and leadership team, decided they wanted to be R1, there's a whole bunch of metrics that go into that. They looked at that, and where they had a gap was social science funding and PhDs. And so The social science faculty rightly pushed back to say, well, we may have this gap, but we have no resources. So if you want us to begin to fill that gap, you need to begin to fill in some resources. And so Fred created this position. The odd name comes from having creative arts under the umbrella. So a lot of times people think, well, the work in creative arts, if you're making music or you're creating sculptures and things, those are creative works or scholarly works. And interestingly enough, it turns out in their P&T document, they simply use the word research. So the word research actually would have encompassed everybody. And so some days when I have to explain what I do because of my title to people, I think, well, I should just be an associate vice president for research, but then that's not nearly as cool. And so I've kept the cool title that nobody knows what I do. But I'm essentially an associate vice president for research. And I work mainly with and on behalf of faculty in the arts, social sciences, and humanities. Obviously, my easiest group to work with is social scientists because that's what I am. And so it's very easy for me. And they're the groups most likely to pursue external funding as well and or to run into problems as they're doing their research because it more often involves human subjects, export control, things like that. So I have a lot of interaction with social science faculty, building a portfolio in arts and humanities, and trying to sort of understand the issues that they face. So I work one-on-one with faculty. So I do mentoring, career development. I work with Teaching and Learning Commons to do broader-based faculty development where a whole bunch of people can come. And then also work at the university level to make sure our voices are recognized so that the conversation isn't always and or only focused on engineering or the Davis College as a land grant. Obviously, ag was a big part of the history. So making sure that other perspectives are recognized and voices heard so that I'm the voice of the faculty in those groups at meetings that they're not at. And then you shouldn't be at in terms of your job is actually not to run around all day and be in meetings. So I do a lot of things at the university level just to make sure our voices are represented. And I do that within the research office as well. So Fred is a chemist. And so sometimes reminding him, right, of different perspectives and valuing different types of research as well as different levels of funding. So $10,000 to a social scientist, which could support a graduate student and or nearly a summer month of salary, right, is a way bigger deal than $10,000 to an engineering faculty. And it's important. And we may have different sources of funding. We may be able to do research with very little funding, and that's a consideration as well. So if you don't actually need money, should you be spending a lot of time getting money? Some time getting money, yes. It gives you flexibility. So when I was a faculty member, we had a very poor support system for faculty travel. So in my department, you got $200 per year. That was it. There was no university travel. Later in my career, we had some college level funding, but it was incredibly competitive. And so that didn't go to most people. So you had to fund yourself. And so that was one nice thing that I never had to ask anybody for permission to go anywhere I wanted, right? Because I had some external money, right? If I wanted a new computer, I just bought one. If I wanted a laptop or an iPad, I bought one. And so external funding, even if you don't need it for your research endeavors, actually is really helpful for the rest of your faculty life, and it gives you some freedom from begging and from oversight. And so I always, obviously, we're the research office. We encourage people to get external funding. So one of the confusion points often for people is what is the research office versus the research corporation? So I'm actually a research office employee. I'm an actual WVU employee. I hold tenure as a full professor in psychology, so can step back and or be forced to step back at any moment in time. And some days I'm like, wow, that's an exciting life. But the Research Corporation was formed in an era in which the state has a lot of different financial restrictions and rules that make it very difficult. In particular, it made it very difficult to hire temporary people. So hiring a postdoc or hiring a project coordinator for a 3-year project. If you attempted to hire a project coordinator in the WVU system, once they were in the system, you were stuck with them as an employee forever, and had to find them employment. And so, you can't guarantee your grant is going to go on or that you need that person. So that's why Research Corporation was created. So Research Corporation itself is just a pass-through bank. So it's basically a bank set up to allow flexibility. Now there are some people who are employed by Research Corporation, meaning that they use Research Corporation money to pay their salary, but we're all working on behalf of the research office. And so we're actually, all of our programming is the research office. So OSP, IRB, export control, me, Sheena, my counterpart who works with natural sciences and engineering, Fred, we're all research office. And so the Research Corporation is really just this pass-through entity to theoretically, make our hiring and our finances easier. And there are times in which most of our grants run through Research Corporation, but there are different agencies that say you have to run it through the university. And so you can run a grant through the university as well. And then obviously you have foundation grants, which may or may not run through our office depending on if you have human subjects or other types, animal or other biosafety things. They have to run through our office, through the KC system. Or if you're obligated for something specific back to the foundation. So if they're hiring you to do a project and then you have to have a report at the end of that, or they're hiring you to do a book or a report, a technical report, that has to come through OSP because they have to check and make sure that we've met the conditions of that money. There was, before I got here, about 15 years ago, a big scandal where we had a faculty member accept a foundation grant for like $45,000. They were supposed to have written a report. They spent all the money, didn't write the report, and the foundation rightfully asked for their money back, which WVU provided for them. As a fellow faculty member, right, that breaks my heart because that's 3 to 4 RSA grants that could have been given out and a whole heck of a lot of travel grants that could have been given out. And so really want to make sure that that one bad actor, right, doesn't spoil it for the rest of us and waste resources. So our office has the 2 associate vice presidents for research. We sort of divide things up along disciplinary boundaries as well as programmatic boundaries. So I handle all of the internal grant programs that run out of the provost office. So faculty travel, research and scholarship advancement, community engagement, and academic conference. Sheena, my counterpart, runs Peace Corps, which is the baby EPSCoR program. So it's not like Peace Corps, you go to help people in the developing world. But it is, if you've had and they're usually federal only because foundations don't give you written feedback and you have to have written feedback. So if you had a foundation grant that had written feedback, you could apply for Peace Corps. But Peace Corps is a program in which you have to have already applied for usually federal funding and have gotten very good reviews, and you just need something else. You just need a little bit more pilot data, or you need another analyses, or you need another collaborator. You need some time and space to rewrite the proposal, but you're in the almost got it range. And so these are small grants to hopefully help you then be successful and get the grant. And those are competitive. With the budget cuts, we're now funding 7 to 8 a year, down from 10 to 12 per year, which was way down from at the heyday of this program. Apparently it was $750,000 a year This is before I came. I was like, wow, that's a lot of money. But a couple of years ago, it was about 300,000, and this last year and this year will be about 200,000. But that is a possibility for funding. The internal grants, I think everybody knows about the travel grants, and those are 2 times per year. The fall deadline just passed. Spring deadline will be February 5th. So it's always the 5th Monday of the semester, which with the weird Wednesday start puts the fall one really late. Feels weird. But that is a program that we try to maintain, that's funded out of the provost office. We fund all of the travel requests first, and then the leftover money goes to the research and scholarship advancement pool. The committee, so it's a Senate committee, the committee, which we concur with, felt that you get more bang for your buck by spreading out the travel money to more people rather than funding more pilot grants. One can certainly make a logical argument the other way as well, but we'd either have to start cutting back on travel, which colleges and departments are already cutting back on travel, and we know that travel is something that almost all faculty try to engage in, at least if not once a year, twice a year, at least once every other year. So trying to help the most number of people. So, and then the three internal grant programs are the Research and Scholarship Advancement grants. Now those are more, now you can certainly have already applied for funding and just need something else and apply to that pool as well, and not Peace Corps and or both of them. But this is also a place where you can get pilot money. So if you haven't tried out the idea and you need some pilot data to be able to then apply, all of the grants, probably almost all of the grants that this college would apply for would be seed funding, so that you actually want to go get external funding. We have a second type of grant, which is called scholarship. That would be if you were writing a book, and it's not really a project that would get funding. And so if you're writing a book, that would be something that you could apply for. Typically, scholarship grants go to people in the humanities and the arts for those types of projects, but we have funded a couple of social science, large book-related projects. Those are a max of 15,000. An extra 3,000 if it's an interdisciplinary project. And you, the researcher, have an opportunity to tell how that's interdisciplinary. So it doesn't necessarily need to be cross-college. It's easiest to sell, obviously, if it's cross-disciplines or cross-colleges. The musicians make an argument that that having a trumpet person and a flute person is interdisciplinary. But again, that's up to the committee. And that has, because the use of the travel money has increased as grant funding decreases, and more people are using that, and college funding and departmental funding goes down, that piece of the pie is going up, the RSA pie is going down. The fund line on those proposals last year was at the 15% line. So there was, in the past, very good proposals would have been funded. Now excellent proposals are being funded. And unfortunately, very good proposals are not being funded. But what I've seen is that people, they get feedback, which they can get from me, and they revise their RSA applications. Typically, the second time that they apply, they're usually they have a higher success rate. I have seen one project go the other way. Because again, the committee makeup changes. That's another potential source of pilot funding. And you can actually include funding for one conference for you and a graduate student at the same maximums, which is $700 for domestics, $900 for international. So kind of a nice little bonus way to get some extra travel money is part of what, because one of the things that obviously we want people to disseminate, right? And the more that you put your name out there and your work out there, the better it is for WVU. And then 2 other internal grant programs we have is community engagement, which is the old public service grants. So community engagement would be, again, kind of pilot money for, and I would guess that there's a lot of projects in CPAS that would be appropriate to this kind of money, but it's obviously taking your academic work out with a community partner. Again, why they're community engagement and not public service is because ideally that's a partner that you're building this relationship with, and their $10,000 maximum. The committee loves direct costs, so they love to spend on the stuff that you need to do your thing, and it's for the state of West Virginia. And so it's something that you're doing out in the community. And so it's a way to get a small amount of money. Last year, we ran out of good proposals to fund in that bin of money. So there's $60,000 total dollars. And so these are grants that if you write a competitive grant, there's a pretty high likelihood that it'll be funded. So that's a possibility. They will not fund the same project more than once. And so it is really a seed funding program to either get something started or to take something to the next level, to replicate something that we have not funded before that you would like to see replicated. It is not for research, so it cannot be primarily to collect research data. Obviously, you can collect any data you want as you're doing the project, and you should, but the focus really has to be on community engagement. And then the last category of grants is a new one that some people may be interested in, and it's an academic conference grant program. That's a $30,000 program, $10,000 limit. Preference given to those who have matching funds, which have to be cash, either from the department, college, or national organization. So it's two-pronged approach. One is you could actually bring a regional or national conference to WVU. It has to be in Morgantown. So it does not have to be at WVU. So if you bring a big conference, you're obviously not going to be able to hold it here. So at Waterfront or wherever you're going to host it. But there would be some showcasing of Morgantown, WVU, what you do. So we've had a couple of regional conferences, a couple of national conferences. It is not for state level conferences because the whole point is to get our reputation out there, to bring people to us. So I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but oftentimes, right, people have a lot of stereotypes about West Virginia, and you bring them to campus and they're like, wow, this is so impressive. So part of it is we want them to come and see, yes, we have flushing toilets in West Virginia. We actually had the same problem in Oklahoma, where we had kids come from the coast and they're like, you don't have teepees? I'm like, no, we don't even have reservations in Oklahoma. But people have the craziest stereotypes, right, when they don't live in the state.
Do they have to be, can they be student professional conferences?
No.
Okay.
So yeah, it would have to be faculty. Students could come and you could actually, so we actually had one conference that we supported. The national conference was coming here. They used our money to support extra students coming to the conference.
Okay.
So the conference itself was the big national meeting. They used the money to be able to give scholarships to students so that it would be free for students to come. So that would be appropriate. The other way that you can use that money is if you need to bring people together as live bodies to work on a large seminal project, however you define that. And you need those 8 people or those 5 people all together for a weekend. That is another use of the money. And so we've had a couple of projects like that. One in G&G where they were looking at GIS mapping and humanity. And so they had 7 leading experts all get together and present sort of working chapters and talk it through. And So that's another sort of space in which if you're doing work like that, or you're thinking about doing work like that, that's a possibility as well. And that one's even easier to host because typically it's small, so you host it, right? The people come in the conference room. It would be for those sort of intensive, sort of academic projects that you might be working on that would result in sort of, right, what we would hope to be super famous, cited piece in your field. So that's another possibility. All of the grants but academic conference are applied for through KC. Academic conference has a separate Qualtrics online thing. Note that academic conference grants are not for you to go to conferences. The $10,000 limit on that should probably clue people into this is not for you. So your conference travel is under faculty development and travel.
For the academic conference, would it be on this campus, or say if we were doing something and it was more appropriate to be down like in the New River Gorge by the Bechtel Summit for what we're doing, but it has to be here on campus?
Now, you could certainly take people there.
Okay.
And you could certainly ask for funding for a bus, right, to take the people there. That's part of what you want to use the money to cover.
Okay.
But the home base has to be here. Because the whole point is to showcase us as the super leader in whatever you guys say we're the super leader in. So establishing yourself. One of the things, we had a provost at Oklahoma State who was fabulous at staking a claim to things that you really had no right to stake a claim to. So it was a provost whose entire education was private, entire career was private for like 40 years, came to a land grant, just started writing op-ed pieces on what it means to be a land grant, edited a book, what it means to be a land grant. He just staked a claim that we, Oklahoma State, will tell you what it means to be a land grant. I will tell you about it. And interestingly, nobody argues with that if you tell them we are the expert. So part of the idea here is that it's obviously legitimate, but if we feel we have an expertise in something, we are publicly staking that claim and saying we have an expertise in this, come to us. We're going to showcase us. We're going to showcase our expertise. We're taking the lead. We are the organizers of this. So either the organizers of this edited book or monograph, theater production, whatever it might be, and or regional or national conference. And so that sometimes people might be interested in potentially hosting a regional conference, and they need, in the application, they need to be able to say they have access to some money. So those applications, we don't get a ton of them, so obviously they're less competitive. We get a lot of RSA applications. So community engagement we don't get a lot, and academic conference we don't get a lot. So those are some things to think about for funding your work. The other thing, so in addition to working with people one-on-one, which I am incredibly happy to do. So when I first came, I love faculty development. I did a lot of sessions when I first came for Teaching and Learning Commons. I did each session twice, once on each campus, because I thought, well, I can't possibly mentor each individual person, right? So I'm going to do these big group things. And then at the end of the year, I thought, no, actually I could mentor each individual person because that's what my job is. And I get to decide every day what I do with my time, and that's part of my time. And so I actually rewrote my job description to put in one-on-one faculty mentoring. So that actually is part of my job. And so I'm really happy to spend time with people, getting to know what you do better, as well as problem solving on trajectory, sharing wisdom, maybe wisdom, of having gone through the process, obviously a different university, right? So there's that caveat, but sort of helping people think through decision trees and points. And one of my big points is to have a mindful career in terms of if you don't know where you're going, other people will roll you in the direction that works for them, which may not be the direction that works for you. And sometimes we all have to roll in directions we don't want to. But if your entire career is spent rolling to the direction of other people, you're not going to be happy or healthy, number one, but you're probably not likely to be successful. And so really thinking through decisions rather than having decisions made for you. Because you will be working. So it just depends on what will you be working on. How do you structure your service to be of the most use to your career as well as to your unit, right? Where's that sweet spot? So that you don't feel that all of your service is busy work. And or you have a unit in which you're not participating in service, and so that unit is like, well, hey, wait a minute, this person never does anything. So sort of thinking through things like that. The other thing that I can help people do is move roadblocks out of the way to the extent that the state regulations and federal law will allow us to. I try my best to move those roadblocks out of the way. Sometimes we can't move them out of the way, but we hopefully certainly make the process slightly less painful. I'm a big believer in if you tell me there's a rule, I'd like to see it in writing. WVU had a history of people making up rules that at one time or another made their jobs easier, but weren't real rules. And so when you get people to say, well, where is that in writing? Where's that regulation in writing? And they're like, well, it's not. Okay, well, let's think about the process then, right? And you don't want to be mean or rude to people, right? But you want to sort of help them think through how much money are we spending on this process versus what is faculty time worth? And so trying to think that through. In particular, when I got here, the IRB had a very negative relationship with faculty in terms of it was very regulatory and very hand-slapping. So we've worked really hard, and their staff have worked really hard to sort of switch that mindset. And Fred has worked really hard with the entire office to switch the mindset that we only exist as a customer service unit, and you're our customers. So if every faculty member tomorrow decides they'll no longer do research here, and every chair and every dean and the provost and the president said that's good, we actually don't need to exist. If we would become so nasty and horrible and evil that all the faculty would say, that research office, they're just so evil, we could get outsourced, right? And that has happened on other campuses where they outsource certain functions where really, hopefully something like that really shouldn't be outsourced, right? We need to know the heart of the university. And so Fred has worked really hard with all of our staff to have a mindset of customer service orientation, that the answer should not be no. The answer should be, let me look into that. Let me think, unless the person knows off the top of their head what the regulation is, right? Or it's clear unethical behavior. To say, let me look into that. Let's see if we can make that happen, right? How can we make that happen? I always try to really understand why is a potential solution I'm offering not going to work? So if something is not going to work, I need people to tell me, okay, why is that not going to work? So in one of the larger colleges, I wanted to get the chairs their travel spreadsheets, and was going through the dean's office thinking I'm being polite and not bypassing the dean. And it turned out that their office is so short-staffed, they did not have the time to be able to just give the department their information. They didn't want them to have everybody's information. And I was stressing them out, making it worse. I was like, okay, I'm not trying to make it worse, right? What I'm trying to avoid is anybody hand entering data I have in a spreadsheet from an email. How do we make that happen, right? Let's iterate. It turned out that me doing it fixed the whole entire problem. And we will hopefully really fix the problem next year when chairs will actually have, and ADRs will have access to the internal grants modules in KC, and they can actually run their own reports. And so right? I don't want people, the reason we went to an online system for the internal grants, particularly travel went first, is because at the time of OSP, but then my assistant, when I took this over, was hand entering the travel information remember the old paper forms that people used to fill out? She was hand entering that into a spreadsheet for 500 travel grants. Now that's a bad use of time. We're not gonna do that anymore. So that's why it actually went online into Qualtrics, and then for the RSA grants, they're obviously, each one has 3 reviewers, and I was done having my assistant make zip files of everything and send them out to people, because I review for programs, so it's all online. Like, okay, we're gonna come into the 21st century, everything is online. Do we buy it or do we build it? And the upfront costs of building it yourself are higher, but over time, they obviously even out. So we built the internal grants modules. And we're rebuilding it this time. So you cannot right now apply for RSA or community engagement. Last year, I don't know if you applied for RSA, we used text boxes for the application, and people hated that. So we're going back to a 5-page application, and you're just going to attach a PDF file. That allows people to do figures, tables, and then to spend the space where they want to. So I might think, well, you should only have 10,000 characters for background, but you really want 15,000. So this way you get to decide what to do with your 5 pages. And so that's an example of an iterative process. So at heart, I'm a social scientist, experimental psychologist. So we do an experiment, figure out what works. That didn't work. Let's try something new. And so if we put processes into place and or try something and it's not working for the faculty, we need the faculty to tell us, like, hey, that really didn't work for us. And that was one thing that really didn't work for people. And so that's, we're going back to, you just upload your document. So hopefully that will be better. The other thing didn't work was we only had a space for 1 co-PI. We're like, well, I have more than 1 co-PI. I'd like to put multiple co-PIs in there. So now you can have up to 3. So just little things like that, but you know, wanting to be willing to improve our processes, figure out what we can do better. So the IRB, when I first got here, I think a full board review was like 400 questions.
It took forever to get reviewed.
It took forever to get reviewed. People would not blink an eye at not hearing back from the IRB for 6 months, which when I came here, I was like, what? And so I know the application is still pretty cumbersome. So we're continuing to look at that, continuing to look at how can we move them away from a biomedical model. So we're still sort of operating from a biomedical model questions versus social science or humanistic science questions. So we're continuing to sort of help them with that. But the review times are much faster. On a exempt, it's really like 2 to 3 days. Expedited, a week and a half, and a full board is 2 weeks to a month, just depending on when you hit. They have 2 full boards that run, so depending on, but for any of those that are not full board, that are on the lower level that you haven't heard from within 10 days to 2 weeks, you should be reaching out to your ADR or to me because it's stuck somewhere. And so that's one of the things that I've tried to change for IRB, but also for OSP. If you are not getting a timely response, is to reach out to me, because something's wrong. And so we don't want it to be normative where people are like, oh, I don't have my IRB for 6 months, or, you know, I turned something into KC and I've not gotten the notification email and it's been like 3 weeks. And you think you submitted your grant and it actually is stuck someplace, or there was a problem when, if you weren't filling it out yourself as a PI, and I think they call them agitators or something. They're not agitators. Aggregators. If you're an aggregator and you recall it, nothing is done with it. It sits there forever. You think you've done what you should do, and it's gone nowhere. I was I did one for somebody and got it into the system, and the person had never used KC, so when they got the email from KC that they had to go in and approve it, they ignored it. They thought it was like some spam email. So I'm thinking everything is fine and dandy. It must have gone forward. And it's like 48 hours later where I was like, it's kind of weird. I heard it that we've got a person assigned to us. So I called OSP and they're like, you don't know what you're talking about, sitting in the system. So but it's that kind of thing, right? Like nobody is working, I think, on a long enough time frame where they could, particularly for OSP, give themselves even 48 hours, right, for something, for you not to be pinged by the system immediately. And that's the real advantage of having to put proposal development into KC, is that system is automatic. So if you hit the submit button and within the hour you're not seeing something, something's not right. If you're having problems getting a funding stream set up or getting a contract signed, that's something that I can sort of try to help make sure it's in the hands of the right people, or that we're elevating it from sort of low level to higher level. Sometimes staff don't recognize a red mark in terms of what is really a red mark issue. And so being able to elevate that now to the next level of John Childress, the director, Alan Martin, the associate vice president that's over those units. And so, but again, if nobody tells them there's a problem, they can't fix it. So if people are having a problem or having a consistent problem, it's really important that we know about it. Sometimes people don't want to tell OSP directly because they think then they'll be on the list over there of people whose grants we never go to in a timely manner. There is no such list, but I'm happy to act as a mediator type person, that if you don't want your name associated with the problem, but you just want somebody to know, hey, I'm in general experiencing these problems, I can certainly put that forward. If it's a specific problem, I obviously have to be able to share, it's a specific problem with this specific project in order to get that solved. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're working. The research office and the processes should not interfere with your work and ideally facilitate your work. The other office that's under us is export control, which most of the time you guys do not have export control tech. In a social science college, you might be doing international travel. And so on the export control website, there's a link for international travel. You answer like 5 questions, and then they look and make sure that you're not attempting to go to someplace that has embargoes. They also have clean laptops you can borrow. So if you're going to a country in which you're likely to be hacked, so China is a big one, then you can take a clean laptop. But really anywhere international, right? If you don't want your machine traveling with you and you want a clean machine that has nothing else on it, that's one way to be able to have that. It's like certified safe. And then obviously WVU knows where you've gone and you're under international travel insurance. So that's helpful, and they simplified. Usually, it used to be if you were internationally traveling, you filled out like a form there, and then like a form over here, and then like the third form over here. And I came in, I'm like, can we have one form? If it needs to go to multiple people, how about behind the scenes you send it instead of asking a faculty member to fill the form out 3 times? So now there's sort of this one-stop shop. We do not do biosafety anymore, so we used to do biosafety. But that's now under environmental health and safety, which is under physical plant. But again, if you're having problems with biosafety people, we'd be happy to facilitate a solution. So sometimes the biosafety rules are made for the people who can potentially blow up the university. And they're really not made for social scientists who are dealing with human samples or something, right? Like they're not biohazard level 4. I don't think we actually do anything over 2 here. So we're not certified to do 4, so we could probably do 3 if we had to. But even like chemical transportation or certifications of people in labs and things in lab safety and things like that. Again, we really want the relationship to be facilitative. and not confrontational. We're currently looking for a new IACUC director, so that's animals. So if anybody's doing animal stuff, we don't currently have an IACUC director. So we're looking for a person to be able to sort of head that up and again have this collaborative relationship of, right, obviously unless you're like super evil and hopefully we haven't hired you, you don't want to hurt the animals you're working with, right? We don't want to hurt the people we're working with. We're actually all, well, I read Ed's comments in the latest CPAS magazine, but we're going to assume we're all coming from an ethical perspective.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, right?
Some of the time.
Depends.
We're, well, and we certainly, hopefully, we don't want to harm our human subjects, right? So if the IRB people, staff recognize that we're coming from this good place, we want to be compliant, and we need those two to mesh, right? Like, so we don't want the attitude to be, oh yeah, you're setting out, researcher, to do something bad. I'm sure you're going to do something bad. But rather the other way around, that you're setting out to do good. The IRB is there as third-party eyes to simply question, hey, if you were going to do it this way, like, is this an okay way to do it? So, you know, it's more of a collaborative relationship. I would encourage people, particularly for full boards, to reach out to the IRB staff. Where at Oklahoma State, where I came from, I was on the board, and we actually had a little bit of a different process on full boards. The primary reviewer would actually reach out to the faculty member before the meeting to go through what they thought the potential concerns were going to be, so that when we came to the meeting, that the reviewer, could explain like the points that I thought would cause problems for the IRB, but why maybe those shouldn't cause points. And then we actually had so we would discuss it as an IRB, and then the faculty member was there and then was brought in so that they could answer questions right on the spot. It really cuts down on the back and forth. And when I first came here, there was sort of this wall of secrecy, like as if you take out hits on the IRB members if you knew who was reviewing your thing. I'm like, that's the wrong attitude. We're supposed to be partners. Like, the person that's the primary reviewer, they're going to be able to get answers to those questions. We don't want to shut down research, right? We want to be able to do it in the most ethical way. And I, as a reviewer, might say, well, okay, you could do this, but I need the researcher to tell me no, because you would compromise the integrity of my study, right? Okay, well, you can't do what you want, you can't do what I want. What's the middle ground? So we had an alcohol use study where the students were going to wear an ankle monitor. So they had not been arrested or anything. It was a live tracking of your alcohol use. But the IRB was afraid that if the police saw that on students, they would assume that they were bad guys who had already gotten in trouble and would be more likely to harass them on the street. And so we had to come up with a solution where the person could still collect their live data of alcohol use without putting the students at risk. And so we ended up coming up with these cards and meeting with the police department to let them know for this period of time, you're going to see a lot of students with these on. They're not criminals on house arrest. And then the student had the card to be able to show to the officer, no, I'm part of this study, that's why I have this. And so that was a good compromise. So that's the perspective that I come from, and I try to bring to the IRB here in working with them. The sort of new things we have on the horizon, the research office is going to be supporting the library to be getting an institutional repository in place. So I don't know if you know what that is, but that is basically a place where when you accept a federal grant now, you're accepting a mandate to make the data reasonably publicly available, as well as the publications from that publicly available. And right now, we don't have a central space for which faculty can do that, or help for you to do that. So, and we don't monitor it. So we're basically saying, well, we hope that our faculty are doing it. If we have a bunch of people not doing it, that actually affects you, because the feds if they decide to do an audit and they see that you're non-compliant, then they will shut down all of your federal funding. And so, first of all, you don't want to be the faculty member who brings the audit down on anybody's head. It's not good. But we also, right, don't want to affect people's funding that they have going on. So the feds can freeze your funding, which is not pleasant. So we want to make it easy on faculty to be able to have this institutional repository. The other thing that happens is when you have an institutional repository and your work is widely available, it becomes more cited. And that helps you, the faculty member, because now your name is out there even more as an expert in this area. And so that will be coming online. I don't know if you guys saw, so B Press was an independent company that had this great institutional repository, and Elsevier just bought them. Elsevier is like the Satan devil, right, of academic publishing. They charge a whole lot of money. And so there's been some concern about them buying B Press. But B Press is keeping their prices the same as they were last year for right now. So we're going to be able to sort of get this institutional repository into place. As an R1 institution, it's something that we need to do for our faculty. We'll have a librarian that'll be able to help faculty get their data set in the appropriate way into the repository, get your academic presentations. The other thing then is your data set gets a DOI number. So if people are going to use the data set, then they have to cite it. So there's a way for people to cite your data set. So then you can pull that as a metric as well to say, my data set was used by 52 people across the world, right? So that's another metric that you will be able to report as in terms of scholarly productivity. One of the things that I was looking up when preparation for this meeting was, have we made it easy for people to get an ORCID ID? So an ORCID ID is an individual investigator ID that you can, it's free, you can apply for it, and then it tags with everything you do. So as you know, like if you look yourself up in Google Scholar, if you have a common name, there's a lot of stuff that then gets applied to you, and you have to try to call it out so that review committee doesn't think you just tried to take credit for 53 things you didn't publish. So I Googled ORCID ID at WVU, and this cool thing from the library came up. It's under Lib Guides, so libguides.wvu.edu. And then there's I think that would get you to the general thing, but /scholarly metrics, all one word, had this really cool articles on alt metrics and things like Google Scholar and PubMed. Had some hints and tips for getting, there's two different IDs. One's an ORCID ID and the other is a researcher ID. It had links for both of those. And so that's something that we're actually trying, and we're trying to catch people at new faculty orientation and get them an ORCID ID right there. So OSP's there trying to get them their ORCID ID. The other thing that we have available, and I think OSP might have come over and done a training last year, the year before, but it's the Pivot database. And that's on our website, the research.wvu.edu. Under the researcher section, you can sign up for Pivot, that's free. For the really old people in the room, it's the old Community of Science, rebranded as Pivot. But you can put keywords in that you want them to send you alerts for, as well as search for experts that are in the Pivot database, either at your home institution or at other institutions. So while it's not an ideal way to find collaborators, it is a potential way to find collaborators. Sadly enough, I tend to be the ideal way to find collaborators, which is not an efficient system, right? I operate on the, if I'm hit by a bus philosophy, right, will the world go on in a seamless manner? So we obviously need to do a better job of having an experts database that is easily searchable by all of us, that we're all in. And that's actually one of the things that B Press does. They want a lot of extra money to do it, so we're not paying for that right now in this climate. but we're thinking about that. And we're trying to think if we have a small database right now internally that UR uses to find people who want to talk to the media. So we're looking at working with UR to expand that, where everybody would have their 5 keywords or 3 keywords in the expert database so we could find each other, as well as if you were interested in serving as an expert person for the lay public, you would be in that database as well. So that's sort of what I do. And I do things like this, right? Come over to departments, chat with people. I love to see what people are doing. I'm always happy to come to talks. Student research, I was like, I get Jack to invite me to Student Research Day next year. But to come to different talks and things, if I can, I try to come to different talks, either visiting speakers or things that you guys are doing. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Sometimes people have issues, but they don't want to talk about them in public, so I'm happy to talk about that in private. So I obviously have nothing to do with any system that was put into place before I came here, and I really don't take anything personal at work. So if you hate something about KC, or you hate something about the internal grants program, and you have ideas of what would make it work better, even though it's my program, it doesn't hurt my feelings. And so don't hesitate to give me, I like constructive feedback. So, you know, anything that we can do to make your lives easier is what we're trying to do. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And never comply, I'll tell you this, never comply with anybody who would ever tell you, you must destroy your data before talking to me. Because it would be unlikely to be true. And so, you certainly, it would not be a determination done at a very low level. That would obviously be a very serious violation. One that is almost never undertaken against a faculty member by an IRB. Students will be more likely to get that penalty as a lesson learned if they did something that, we've had, when I was on the IRB, we had a couple of students who collected data with no IRB in place, and so they lost the data. The 4 years that I was on, a faculty member never lost their data. And only one was unable to collect their data. So of all the projects, so.
So do we have any questions? A lot of good information.
I will say, I think we've met 2 or 3 times. If you haven't had an individual meeting with her, it's well worth your time. They usually go very long and very informed, but always really, really helpful.
Thank you.
Does your work extend over to the Health Science Center?
It does, sort of. So they have, you know, historically the Health Sciences Center was incredibly isolated. So before, it's actually even before President Clements. As you may know, the position that Clay currently holds as Vice President of Health Sciences Center, the person who held that position before named themselves Chancellor of the Health Sciences Center. So when I was looking at the job here, I was like, that's really weird, because chancellors usually outrank presidents. So like, how do you have a chancellor of a health sciences center that is theoretically under the university president? So the health sciences had historically been allowed to sort of do their thing. And President Gee very quickly shut that down. And when the job was advertised, it was advertised as a vice president for health sciences, who functions sort of like the provost does. But the provost herself is actually over health sciences as well. So in the last 2 years, their P&T has come under the provost office. And prior to that, it had never been reviewed by the provost office. And so they actually have a whole sort of separate infrastructure in terms of particularly pre-award support, but they have a senior executive vice president for research and graduate education, although they are technically under Fred. So Fred would be in charge and on the hook for anything across the university. So they work very closely together. And so we try to be as helpful as possible, and then they use obviously the IRB and OSP. It's one IRB, one OSP. And then particularly around the health disparities, well, now it's health equities, I think, or just health, Mountaineer Health. But the original health disparities Mountain of Excellence, we were charged with sort of trying to help facilitate after it had sort of was falling by, the mountains had fallen by the wayside, and they were given to our office to try to sort of corral now several years into the process. And so I would have more contact with them in the spaces in which they overlap with the main campus people. And again, trying to get people hooked up with things like the CTSI. Right, so if you do any sort of health-related work, I would strongly encourage you to join the West Virginia CTSI. It's free. You get 10 hours of biostatistics help, I think a month? I think it's a month. So they have biostatisticians who, that's all they do all day is like statistics. And they can do really sophisticated statistics that the rest of us can't understand, even as a statistician.
Says the statistician.
Yeah, so I'm like a basic level statistician, and I can run a structural equation model if you make me. But right, these guys and gals are running this really sophisticated modeling. And they're very helpful, and particularly they can also help you with design help as well. So that's a great resource. They have a weekly newsletter that comes out. They have pilot funding, small, tiny grants of $5,000 up to $50,000. I think one year they ran a $100,000 competition, and they've just been renewed for another 5 years. And so in particular, Sally Hodder, who's the director, is really big on that translation piece. So under the original grant, and Sally was not the original director, they were funding a lot of bench science. And Sally came in and said, no, that's not actually what this is for. It's to take all of our bench science, and that's their basic research, and apply it, translate it, get out there. And so she's very big on that. So if you do work that translates to the community, that's a space in which you want to look for funding. And they have a ton of pre-award grant support people, and they have a career development person, and so they have a lot of peoples.
Any other questions? Okay, Melanie, thank you very much.
Thank you guys.